Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 1, Day 2. Make sure you get your journal completed. Today I have a very easy question for you. If you could go back in time, what region of the world would you explore and why? I also want you to think about what areas of the world were already established in the 1400s or in the time period that you chose, and just think about what would be the effect of you going to that time period. For example, if you went back into Roman times, there'd be no cell phones, there'd be no refrigerators, there'd be no electricity, there'd be nothing that we consider a modern amenity. So, just to give you something to think about, give you a very easy journal topic, but go ahead and get that copy down in your journal. Make sure you're keeping up with that each week. You do not need to write down the question, but you definitely do need to be doing your journal. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is going to be about early explorers. And the focus of day 2 is just kind of getting into what is the world like in 1492, really pre 1492 and the discovery of the Americas. And this map that you have in front of you here, this kind of gives you an idea of what they thought the world looked like. And I'm going to give you a second to look at that. And hopefully now you've realized that North America and South America are missing. They aren't there, they aren't on the map. So we're going to take a step forward to after 1492 and look at a modern day map. And you'll notice that this whole area here is on that map. Okay, so Asia, Europe, Africa, and if you notice, Asia's here, Europe's here, and parts and most of Africa, but then it's just kind of like there's nothing else really around it. It's kind of like the world ends, and that's why a lot of people, up until I can't give you the year, but up until a good portion of time, believed that the Earth was flat. And Christopher Columbus's journey, along with many others, is going to do a lot to kind of put that to bed, that it was not flat, and that's kind of where we're going to pick up today. So Christopher Columbus was Italian. However, he was rejected by multiple groups when he suggested his idea of sailing to find a water route to Asia. So he ends up sailing for the Spanish crown in 1492, and we could go a lot into that with Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, but we do not have to spend any time on that because this is American history, not world history. Christopher Columbus landed in the Bahamas in 1492, and he actually, after he got there, went on to sail to Cuba and thought that he had reached China. But he had actually, in fact, discovered a new country, which he still did not believe many years after. The three ships that he took was the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Many people have heard that story about the three ships, so we don't spend much time about that. You do not need to know that for a test. But the main goal for Columbus was to find a water route to Asia, and the real reason that he wanted to do this was for raw materials and gold. If he could find a water route to Asia, no longer would they have to travel the Silk Road, and no longer would they have to worry about crossing all these countries to trade with their Chinese neighbors, who they really desperately want to trade with. Now they can have a direct route, and you can connect two of the biggest um, um, countries in the world at this time. So here's a look at the route that Columbus took. If you notice that he did sail south to start down the coast of Africa and then over. Obviously, he did not discover India or China or a new country or Asia, excuse me. He ended up discovering a new country. Now, in order to try to prove that he had discovered a new country, he decided that he would take slaves back to Spain. And this would prove the success of his journey, that he had found a new country. The problem was no one believed him, or at least they did not believe that he had found Asia, strictly because he had no proof. He had nothing from the Chinese emperor, he had nothing from Asia that proved he had been there. His voyages did result, however, in Spain devoting a great number of resources to maritime travel over the next 100 of 200, 300 years, all the way to the Spanish Armada in the 1500s. You're going to see Spain really start to grow its sea voyages. And Columbus is going to end up dying in 1506, never really knowing that he discovered a new country. He kind of accepted the idea, but he never really kind of wrapped his head around that he had discovered this new world. And so he never ends up naming the new continent. He discovers this whole new place and ends up never naming it. And so the naming part fell to a man by the name of Amerigo Vespucci. And Vespucci, also an explorer, comes over and writes these vivid descriptions of the New World. And as it so is told, and so it is, it ends up giving the name the Americas, which is named after Amerigo himself. Kind of stinks to be the guy that explores and finds everything, and somebody else ends up getting it named after him. Now, Columbus was not a nice guy, and we're gonna look at some things about Columbus over the next day or two. But more specifically, Columbus was an explorer, and he brought 4 different voyages to the Bahamas and to Cuba. And you'll notice there that they traveled in some very different places each time and explored kind of the area around. And I think by the last voyage, Columbus was starting to realize that he had discovered somewhere entirely different than Asia. Now, moving forward into some other Spanish explorers, Hernando Cortez. He was an unsuccessful governor in Cuba for 14 years, so you do the math of when he landed in the Yucatan. That's going to put you somewhere around about 1505 that he started in Cuba. And so that's right around the time that Columbus had died. But he brought in 1519 a group of conquistadors, or conquerors as the term is known as, and they were searching for gold. And not gold they had seen, but rumored gold that they had been told the Aztecs had. And so if you remember from day one notes, we talked about the Aztecs were conquered. This is who did it. Cortez is going to lead this attack on the Aztecs and try to attack them and take their gold and silver and all these resources that they allegedly have. The problem is that the Aztecs had a very powerful society. The downside for the Aztecs is they were exposed to smallpox unknowingly. It wasn't like Cortez was out coughing on people, but they were exposed to smallpox, and this in turn is detrimental to the Aztec population. And so when Cortez leads Spaniards back a short period of time later, he's able to take the city of Tenochtitlan in his second conquest. So unfortunately for the Aztecs, even though they had a very powerful society and a very strong society, they were destroyed by a disease they just had no immunity to. Okay, here's Cortez reaching the Aztecs, and you'll notice in the picture he's kind of painted as almost like a deity or almost like a god. And there were those in the Aztec society that believed he was Quetzalcoatl, which is a deity in their society, a bearded deity that was supposed to be a god, but obviously he was more like a demon. Now, the next person that we will speak of today and the next Spanish explorer is Francisco Pizarro. And Pizarro conquered the Incans in 1532, and that is kind of where we left off yesterday. We were talking about the Incan Empire, and I told you that we would pick up with Pizarro. Essentially, what he did was he sailed out of the Panama Canal and sailed down the coast of Peru, and I don't think I have that map. I don't. But he sailed down the coast of Peru, and he came in the middle of like this civil war going on in Peru, and he's able to trick the supreme leader of the Incan people. And what basically does, he invites him to dinner and convinces him to bring his 5,000 men with him that protect him, but have them come unarmed. And so when they show up, obviously, as you can guess, he attacks them along with his men before the Incans know what happened, and he's captured. Now, Atahualpa begs Pizarro, as you notice in the picture, he's begging Pizarro in this picture, and says, if you'll free me, I have a room of gold and a room of silver, and I will pay a ransom to you if you'll just let me go. Unfortunately, Pizarro kind of double crosses him and takes the room of gold and the room of silver, and then never gives him back. And he's meant to be hung, and like tried and hanged, I guess you should say. But unfortunately, he died a much worse death, and he ends up being strangled to death after the ransom was paid. Effectively, this ended the Incan Empire. Once their leader was gone, the Incan people fell apart. I mean, I want you to think about 12 million people and how vast their empire really was. But for the next 300 years of history after this, the gold mines of Spanish America, so from Mexico all the way to South America, yielded 10 times more gold and silver than the rest of the world combined. So this was a very profitable journey for Pizarro, and obviously there was gold and there was silver, but they destroyed an entire culture in order to do it. The next part we'll talk about is just the actual Spanish society. So we've kind of talked about a couple of the leaders. We talked about Cortez, talked about Columbus. What happened when these conquistadors actually got there? And that's what we're getting to here. Is that they're going to dominate society. And Spain specifically was highly involved in the Americas early on. A lot of our influence as a country in the United States comes from the English, but in regards to settling the New World and establishing kind of the groundwork, you have to give it to the Spanish. And they did this by setting up these huge farms known as encomiendas. And an encomienda was given to a Spanish soldier who would then, basically, it was kind of like a charge, and he had to take these Native American workers, force them to work on his farm. He would be forced to convert them to Catholicism, and essentially, supply them food and housing. But it was his job to basically kind of control them and build up society for the Spanish. Now, they did some good things on these encomiendas for Spanish society and Spanish American society specifically, like growing sugar cane, finding gold and silver, growing crops, etc. And they also, like I said, forcefully converted these natives to Catholicism. The bad thing about all of Spanish American society, and you can sum it up in one phrase, which is they killed most of the Native Americans by work or disease. They didn't have to shoot them. They didn't have to kill them by the sword. They basically just had to show up because the Native Americans here had no immune system to all these diseases that they brought from Europe to America. There was no shots. There was no immunizations. Now, you have 4 questions here today that I want you to go over. What were the 2 implications of Columbus's landing in the Americas? What were the 2 main killers of Native Americans? That should be an easy one. How did the Incan Empire end? Make sure you give me a good explanation for that question. And then what was the large farming system that was introduced by the Spanish? Last thing for the day, here are your 4 vocabulary words. Make sure you're getting these down. And if you need any help, please let me know.